Greetings, fellow travelers, and welcome to the Way of the Showman, where we view the world through the lens of showmanship. I am Captain Frodo, and I will be your gracious host and guide along this next leg of the way. As always, it's a pleasure to be back with you, and I really hope that this finds you well. Certainly, I am doing good. There's just been what's called Culture Night here in Haugesund, Norway. It was a powerfully rainy and stormy night, and during this night there's lots of stuff. It goes on during the day too, even though it's called Culture Night. Lots of events, and some of those events that people could choose. You buy it's like a festival, you buy a badge and then you can, or like a pass, and then you can go anywhere and everywhere in town. And I did 2 family shows, and it just sort of struck me that the shows that I did earlier on in that month, they were done on a massive stage in an enormous tent in Germany, in Duisburg, Germany, with Flick Flack, which is this enormous punk circus that I talked about last time. And I went from that huge stage there, and all the artifice, if you can call it that, which backs up that show. Giant circus, you park outside, there's a foyer tent where you can buy drinks and merch, and it's all very cool and very well set up. So by the time you get inside that tent, you're already very excited by all the things that is propping it up. And then a few weeks later, I am, or not even that much, but I'm then at this Culture Night, and the event that I was at was a, what would you call it, a micro event put on by parents who are making a kind of culture hub, and they'd call it the Culture House, like of this place, Skårdalen Culture House. And I went there, and it's actually in the gymnastics hall of the school, like the sports hall. So it's just a sports hall, and they had like 2 lights that they'd set up pointing in the direction into the corner of the thing. There I am in the corner with my props, and there's one of those fat blue crash mats just sort of stashed on my right, and behind me are the rib walls. I don't know what those are called, but those sort of wooden beamed climbing ladder things that I only really ever see that in school gym things. Anyway, they had, so it's like a real sort of gym hall. It's flat. The guy sort of tapes out the stage on the ground in the corner, covering over here's the lines for the basketball, you can't get any closer, and they're just like going diagonally across all of those, so that I'm sort of getting a diagonal spot in the corner. It's flat. There are no chairs for anyone to sit on, and all of a sudden there's like 200 people arriving up here, families, and all this just sort of like rolling in, and they grab some of those small heavy benches that you use when you do balancing, or I don't know what they do in gymnastics classes, and adults are pulling those over to sit on them. And then it becomes apparent to the organizers that, we do actually have some chairs, even though they're a bit hard to come by. And people go in and they all grab the chairs and they take them out and they stand them at the back, and it's all full of kids. And my father's homemade amplifier is standing in the corner with some cheap wireless microphone on. And anyway, it's all there's no sound system in the place, and it's just a flat ground. There's 2. They have that. I said they had those 2 lights, like 2 spotlights that are pointing in my direction. But the stand that they have is so low that by the time the audience comes in and sits down, it's more or less just lighting up the backs of the audience, because it's not quite high enough. And all of this, and as I'm watching this sort of unfold before it happens, and as I go out and talk to them, I really just have what Jay and Eric talks about on object episodes of Folk Circus in mind. There's nothing here that is propping up the performance, like a gaffer tape line across that says "do not get any closer than this," and which I could have done if we didn't have that sort of trope that I wasn't present when the people were coming in. I could have just stood there and told them to do it. Like Jay and Eric talks about them being in Iceland and them sort of being that was one of the features of certain of their performances, where they're actually there when the audience is coming in already, like to just take that blur that line of what the performance is or whatever. But anyway, I just found it really valuable to have in my mind carved out this niche of folk circus. Like, we're just here, I have a program of material that I want to do. They come in, they're excited they've driven out in the dark and they've walked into the school and then they walk down. It's such an unusual kind of place, and then they like for a show to happen. But as they came in, then of course they were like asking how they've done and who has seen something good, and do you like this culture center that it's specifically been designed architecturally to look like a school gym hall. Have they done that well? And people are laughing and whatever. And just that idea, like, it's so cool that people are going out in the dark, driving out to this school in the middle of nowhere. It's outside of town, like 10-12 minutes drive out into the countryside, which in a small town like that can leave you surprisingly far away from town. Anyway, and then they come through the dark and it's raining and they go in and then they're sitting there and all the kids sitting on the ground and they're shouting and I'm going, who's seen me before? And some has seen me before, and someone in the front row, I've actually performed at their birthday party here not so long ago. And I just really had this sort of feeling like this is what folk circus is. I'm talking to them, go, have you had a good time at the culture night? They're lackluster at responding, of course. And I go, oh, God, it's terrible up until now. You haven't had such a good time? And then they laugh and they go, sure, good, great. Anyway, we're going to have a good time now. It's such a base position to be in. Folk circus, like I really felt that. But then, of course, there's the other end of the scale, like at Flick Flack, which is giant. It's got incredible light rig. It's got lots of huge moving kind of, we call it scenery, but it's actually like most of the moving stuff is just ramps for motorbikes to jump, extreme sport, jumping these massive Superman jumps. And both of them are circus, and there is something in there, and that is that showmanship that you do need. You really need showmanship when you are standing there and it's just a flat floor. It's just me, my father's homemade amplifier, so they can hear me in there properly. And there's a little bit of music. I'm playing some classic circus music, like Barnum and Bailey's style, and marching band music. And apart from that, it's just my bins, some props in there. There's nothing for them really to grab onto, and then I come out and we create the whole thing from scratch. It's just me and them. It's such a base performance, and we talked about that as how the showman and the audience, how that is what creates that thing in between the showman and the audience, which is the show. And we all entered into that with no additional things to help prop it up. No big stage, no big light, no excitement to come in, no real hall or foyer tent where there's cool music playing or whatever. It's just dark, and they're walking through the stairs to the gym hall with the characteristic smells that a school gym hall has, and it is not a theatrical thing, and they come into it. That was a lovely experience, but it made me also then think, because after these two shows I went down to see another show in town. It's like dance theater kind of immersive thing where we go down standing in this 150-year-old building by the sea that's now sort of a theater, Stålhuset, and it's raining and really cold, and we start outside in two groups, and a really sweet old Mercedes-Benz drives up, and two girls dressed as women dressed as detectives come out, and they take us on this sort of trip throughout this whole building. Very beautiful and very cool and moving and interesting story, and all sorts of, like, just this immersive event of being taken from rooms, and we're following blood trails on the ground and all this stuff. And it made me think that there's this sort of always this scale of productions of how much you ask from the audience and how much you give. Like when I'm the style of giving or whatever that I was doing in Flick Flack, and you come in there and you deliver your material and you really just like you pushing it out there, and it's propped up by all the lights in the stage, and then you come in the gymnastics hall, and that becomes the stage in the circus, and it's a whole nother thing. But I'm still like giving in a whole, very much making it an effortless experience for the audience, where they can effortlessly pay attention. I will guide them through, and you take it all. And then when we watch the dance theater immersive walking through the thing, we don't quite know what's going on. And as we came up, and it all climaxed with the cops shooting and blood and everywhere, it's like we were then talking about it afterwards, me and my wife, and it's kind of like maybe it's actually like a reverse narrative, where we get the last scene first, and it's all like you have to think about it, because it's just all cool images, but they are actually connected together. And in this, the performers are asking a little bit more of us as an audience. Each bit was still interesting, but there was room to find much more in there. Like each bit is entertaining in itself, but there is more to be found the more you sort of engage with the work. And that, I think, is interesting to keep in mind when you're sort of creating work. I was kind of inspired to go, that's right, I have ideas that aren't quite outright as entertaining or as giving, or so I'm asking a little bit more of the audience. And those are the gigs that are not usually not so easily booked. I'm thought of always as an entertainer, and I think I do well in not just being cheap time wasting or whatever. I really try to introduce more complex ideas and whatever in what I do in my entertainment, but sometimes I would like to get into situations where I can ask more of the audience, where we are in what I kind of think of as a theatrical experience or whatever. And we will talk about this in a further episode when we talk about art and entertainment and what I sort of see the difference of those being and where we are on that spectrum. But that thing is on a spectrum, and to me it has to do a little bit with how much you ask of the audience. Because by the time they come into the gymnastics hall, and I don't really ask much of them to suspend their disbelief or to or I'm not doing complicated stuff. It's also a family show, so I'm really just like talking directly to them. I am here, you're here. There's no artifice in this situation, apart from the fact that I'm behaving very strangely, but that's what I'm not one of them, but that's what makes it all happen. This is what we looked at last time in the geometry of showmanship, and I'm not really going to do any recapitulation of that. I think I said it all pretty much as detailed as it needed to be said. It's just that the metaphor of geometry is, to me, surprisingly apt for understanding showmanship. And as all good metaphors do, they really back each other up at depth. But last week we did also, when we talk about pillars of showmanship or the essentials of showmanship, we find four things. We find the showman, we find the audience through which the show can emerge between them in the meeting point or area of interest. And the thing that makes that possible is the shared attention. Or as I have come to think of it now, I watched an interesting lecture by this guy Tomasello. What is his name? Michael Tomasello, and he's anthropologist, I think. He's written an interesting book called Becoming Human, an ontology of human. Well, what does it mean to be human? And there he talks about this shared attention, but he kind of talks about it then as like you can pay attention to something together, but he also then talked about joint attention, where the two people have joined their attention and are paying attention back and forth. And I thought that's probably an even better way to describe what I talked about last time as the actual kind of attention that is necessitated. I don't know how to say that. to make a show happen. And that's the thing that we didn't quite get placed into the triangle last time, and it is what we will be looking at today. So, without further ado, let's explore the triangle and the additional thing to it, which from the title of this here you already have got some understanding of. You probably see where I'm going with this. Why, oh why, the triangle eye? The mystical approach to life is playful. To be serious about play is a childlike trait. To be very serious about strange and dumb things is also funny. I would be lying if I said that I arrived at the triangle of showmanship through geometric explorations. As much as I would love to tell you that I sit around with a compass and a ruler and just explore and see what I can discover, that is not quite the truth. The truth is that the triangle was, like the manifesto, a gift from the clown gods. I found the geometric depth and symbolic depth after I was given the symbol. When I reveal that the symbol that was given to me was not just a triangle, but a triangle with an eye inside it, then the most clever of you might have sufficed how attention is represented in the triangular symbol of showmanship. As we have spoken about now at length, where the four different elements of showmanship is the audience, the showman, which then creates through shared or joint attention, creates a show. And how do we find place for these four things in a triangle which only has 3 points? Well, it is by introducing an eye in the center of the triangle. And the discovery and connection to the triangle eye symbol was for me a case of serendipity. Or was it? Does any of these things happen purely by chance? Is it perhaps the right hemisphere of my brain, my subconscious, if you will, sending bottle mail messages to myself through my art? Like with the manifesto, the triangle eye symbol came to me whilst I was working on a new show. Specifically, I was working on a new act, one I had wrestled with and lost for years. I was once again back in the challenger's corner for a round of professional wrestling. The match was between myself and the magic act. For the 12 years performing with La Clique, or La Soirée as it became known, I had been working mainly with 2 acts, my tennis racket contortion act and my can stack balance act that I described earlier. And this meant that I'd become stuck in a certain niche as a contortionist and, physical comedian. And my mannerisms and vocabulary of physicality and the character I had become had almost exclusively performed stunts and contortion. Magic, on the other hand, with its subterfuge and different modus operandi, has a very different flavor. It tells a very different story than, I am now going to squeeze myself through these rackets, or I'm going to swallow this sword, or as I have been known to do, I'm going to hang this beer keg from my nipples. This sort of sideshow mode stunt performance had become my stock-in trade. And to be able to perform magic, I would have to reimagine myself, not completely, but I needed a certain expansion of my character. To those not of the craft, this might seem strange. Can't a performer just do whatever they want? Just step up onto the stage and just show a magic trick or do a handstand and then maybe play a tune on the accordion and be equally engaging, entertaining and authentic with all of them? The answer is more often than not no. If all you've ever performed is juggling and you want to also perform magic, you need an expansion of your character and the modes of performance. To be able to come across as truthful is absolutely imperative, and when you change your character, when you do something outside your comfort zone, there is always the chance that what you do will lose your inner truth. What you do will not resonate with your inner truth. So then what you do is experienced by the audience as inauthentic. We talked about this in an earlier episode, about these two needing to be in agreement, who you are on the inside and what you're saying, and that needs to resonate in the way that you do it. So resonance between the inner and the outer. Something you are just showing them, so that this is how they will experience it. Like, they'll experience whatever it is you do when it's inauthentic as something that you're just showing them, but you're not really doing it. It's not really happening, and it's not really you. It's like you're retelling something that somebody else told you, if that makes sense. It's not really you. It is perhaps self-evident that we can't express our inner truth until we have properly found a deep connection with the material. Authenticity happens when what you do in the outer world is in deep resonance with your inner world. And for this to happen, we need to own the material and its structure. We need to know how we really feel about it and what it is that we want to express. Now, that just makes me think of actors, because at first it might seem like an actor with their sort of acting skills that they've found a loophole in this, that they can just pretend to be something and then do it, since this is the skill of an actor. They can become anyone. The master actor has learned to make deep connections to whatever role or situation they are throwing themselves into. But can an actor bypass this inner connection? Not really, I would say. I'm no actor, but still. An actor's craft teaches them to perfectly mimic these inner connections. But in this mimicry, the connections does become real. Their techniques are complex and varied, and sometimes strange or extreme, which is why, or how actors prepare, have become stuff of legends. Be it the Stanislavski method. Stanislavski literally wrote the book on actor preparations, which is called An Actor Prepares. This Stanislavski method is also related to another variant of this technique, the method acting, that some might remember. Robert De Niro drove a cab in New York for months to sort of find and connect to his inner truth as a taxi driver for his astounding performance in the movie Taxi Driver. An actor's way is perhaps more open for adaptation than a path taken by an acrobat who has spent the absolute majority of their preparation on the physical skill aspects of an act. Yet, having spent their time learning to mimic the inner truth of many characters, their repertoire of tricks and physical skills might then be smaller than the acrobats. So you win some and you lose some. So what we are talking about here for myself, what I was looking for was an expanded character. Anyway, just to finish off that thing about the actors and everything, so even actors usually have a sort of range that they end up being within, that they play a certain kind of character, and when they present all of a sudden a new movie or whatever, a new play, and they play a very different character than what they've done before, then that is often seen as it's a surprise and a big sort of boon to them. Anyway, so let's look at my expanded character. My preparatory explorations for finding a magic act I could truthfully perform lasted from about 2009 until 2013. And in the process of searching for an act, I did not just find an act, but a new mode of operating on stage. I found a new expanded character, a new mode of being, a new me, an expansion or extension of myself. In a way, it was a rediscovery of myself from my days as a boy magician, an assistant in my dad's magic show, translated through years and years of experience. It was a translation, which then fused with the more general character I had developed in the Kamikaze Freak Show, the Happy Sideshow, and in my street show days, only to refine and tune through performing the same 2 acts for thousands of shows in La Soirée and also in Circus Oz. Now, my new magic character was born during the process of remounting a solo show that I had called The Illuminated Showman, and this was in Norway, here in my hometown. And the show had originally been created in English, and it needed to be then translated into Norwegian. And it turned out that some of the show was quite literally lost in translation. So let's have a few thoughts on translation. And there were 2 sections in this English incarnation of that show, which I had called the Midway of Proverbial Artifacts, where I presented on a velvet cushion the actual pearls of wisdom and the very straw that broke the camel's back, and a few other things. And I presented them with a full carnival parlance and sort of exhibitory style. Roll up, get your tickets on display for your viewing pleasure. The genuine, long-lost, much-coveted pearls of wisdom, and so forth. There's much more to that act, but it's enough to give you an idea. Translation, though, is a complex issue. And translating any work of art, say a novel, is complicated enough, and the translator must take decisions about what the original author meant, which invariably makes each translation different from the original. A novel is most often story-based, and if you capture the action, you are well on your way. But the language, the words, expressions, flow, this is the medium which the story presents itself to the reader. So changing those words also changes the story, as it turns out to be the case with everything in life. It's always more complicated, and in this case it's more complicated than just translating words. Translation is about translating meaning as well. Poetry, then, is even worse, even more complicated, poetry being so specific. At least prose is about something. It's a text describing something. And a poem, it is the thing itself. Translating a poem is to completely reimagine it. It is a recreation, in the full extent of that word. It's like writing another poem inspired by the original poem. And great works of art like Goethe's Faust gets translated again and again. And I didn't know this until very recently, that translations of works of art, novels or poetry, that they actually get dated. So the original somehow stays timeless, but each time somebody makes a translation, this lacks this timelessness. The interpretation of that original work, the interpretation is dated. So if it was done in the 60s or whatever, it might now, in 2021, need a new translation to connect with the audience now, whilst the original is still as multifaceted and as it was. The original of Faust remains what it is, always the source of inspiration and great poetic depth, but the translations get outdated. This is a really interesting subject, but this is not the place to dive too fully into it here. That's interesting to think about, so let's return to my personal problems of translating my proverbial Midway act. Because the first problem that I came up against was that changing the spoken language. And for starters, in Norwegian, we haven't got those same sayings. Our version of the straw that broke the camel's back, which was one of the artifacts that I had in the show, is we have a similar expression that is like it's the drop that made the cup overflow. And of course, I could just have used a different object and presented them in the same carnival style, but this is where I came up against the further obstacle, because Norway doesn't really have a traditional carnival vernacular. We have our own carnival tradition of traveling outdoor amusement parks called Tivoli. We also have circuses, but the language of presentation used in these shows is not embedded in the popular imagination, like things like "roll up, ladies and gentlemen, all alive on the inside, step right up," and "that's right, folks," and so on. We don't have that, and in fact, most people today might not even have known that there was, certainly not something that they ever think about, that there was shows at the Tivolis, because today it's pretty much, if not completely non-existent at carnivals in Norway, that there is any kind of performances. It's always machines, you get on rides, you get to throw, you go games of chance and all that sort of stuff. So I decided that if I had to find new sayings, which meant changing the objects to present, and also invent a new mode of presenting them, then it would be easier just to create a new act. It would be like the worst inspired by a true story movies. To do this, I saw a car crash and it inspired me to make a movie about a gorilla. It's a case of grandfather's axe, where both the handle and the axe has been changed. The act would still, in a way, be the proverbial midway act that I'd performed in Melbourne and wherever, but everything about it would have changed, so why not just do something completely different? And since necessity is the mother of invention and growth, I just got to it, and the material with capital M, as we've talked about, as the three different things: character, material, and structure. The material that I settled on to present instead was magic. As I mentioned, I had wrestled and lost with this magic act for some time, and now I had a new fiery motivation. There was a hole in my show which needed to be filled. And the creation was a deeply nostalgic experience, a reimagining of the magic from my childhood. Because magic was my first love as a showman or show boy. I was going back to my roots. And to add to this, I was back home in Norway, living at my dad's, in my dad's basement, the Great Santini's basement, about to present my first full evening show in Norway. In Norwegian. And I'd left Norway in 1996, and it was now 2013. I had some magic props in my luggage that I kept carrying around with me because I wanted to do a magic act. But more importantly, since I was mounting the show in my hometown and was living at home with my dad, I had access to my dad's workshop and all of the magic equipment in his magic laboratory. In the garage, for that's where he's built his fully separate and equipped magic room, I found what I needed in terms of props and tricks. But the greatest of the obstacles that faced me was not finding tricks and routines to do. I had material I'd like to do, and that I'd already sort of sketched out in my mind. The problem was that I hadn't found my character yet. I didn't know how to do it. I knew what I wanted to do, but I didn't know how to do it. I did not know who I was or what I was feeling or expressing when I was handling foam doves and metal containers and metal rings, which were so odd. No one but magicians handles them. And if I wasn't fully feeling like a magician, and not knowing who I was as a magician, and then the tricks were just silly and had no truth in them. I mean, by the time I'd made the act, they would remain silly once I worked out how to do them and perform them. But then that would be an asset and not a flaw, precisely because they would be experienced as authentic and truthfully belonging to and springing from me. But my way of presenting magic had thus far eluded me. How did I, or my on-stage character, feel about the magic he presented? Was he impressed? Surprised? Did he make the magic happen, or did it happen to him? Did it even happen at all? These questions would need to be solved, and I had been thinking about this for literally years. The time for thinking and planning was over. It was time for action. Now I had to do it. I needed to get on the floor and embody solutions to these questions. I backed the car out of the garage, clearing a rehearsal space. Then I looked through all my videos of myself practicing the previous aborted attempts at finding a way of presenting magic. And some of those were from when I lived in Paris and rehearsed in my living room in 2010, and some was from my mother-in-law's garage the year after, and there was a live performance from a late-night show in at the Adelaide Cabaret Festival, where I had live music from an excellent pianist, and I had many attempts, but still no proper idea of how my character felt about the magic that he did. But there was something in there. There was a core that was some in there. But what was this gesticulations, and what would the physicality be? So first, I settled on a different piece of music than I had ever used. Rossini's Thieving Magpie, the version that came from the Clockwork Orange soundtrack. So that's like a rousing classical piece with lots of dynamics. And I'd created a new costume for the rest of the show, which made me look like a magician, even though it had been conceived for the sword-swallowing cucumber act that I talked about in the structure chapter. And the costume was a tailcoat tuxedo topped with a fabulous red turban. And I'd first used this costume for the sword-swallowing act in Lasseret's return season to the Sydney Opera House in December of 2012. But that this had happened helped a lot, because I had already behaved and acted in this outfit. I had taken ownership of the costume. In turn, the tailcoat and turban had sort of shaped me, because you can't put on a big shiny turban with a big ostentatious feather swaying off the top of your forehead and not be affected. I mean, you probably can, but I couldn't. So I stood on the dirty concrete floor in my father's garage, where I was doing my on-the-floor creation. The actual magic room was, and is, too full of props and equipment to use as a rehearsal space. I put on the tailcoat and the turban, and when the music turned on, with the props in my hands, which was a disappearing cane that I was going to use as a devil stick, which is when you use two hand sticks to flip and manipulate a third longer stick in a way that makes it look both visually pleasing and a little magical. And the character just arrived as if responding to being called on. I found some good movement stylings, and most importantly for this next section of our exploration of the way of the showman, it was this symbolic hand gesture that I spontaneously added. The disappearing cane, an almost meter-long silver-collared steel cane, which as the name suggests can disappear, was filled with confetti. And confetti is possibly my most ubiquitous shtick, present in all that I do. And at the appropriate time in the music, I finished my devil stick juggling routine with the apparently solid metal object that I'd just been manipulating. It would simply disappear in a cloud of confetti. And the music was rousing, and all of a sudden I stood there with nothing in my hands, in a shower of confetti, and something needed to happen, and it did. I placed my hands together to form a triangle, so that the thumbs and the index fingers met, and this created a triangle, and I just placed it over my right eye so that I could peep out, an eye in a triangle staring out at my imaginary audience in the garage. The triangle eye had arrived. Through this gesture, the whole character was born. It emerged from all the previous work and development. In the way I presented this, grand, exaggerated movements, a face which showed mystery as loud as if I shouted it, expressed the magic truthfully, as my inner and outer truth connected and authenticity emerged, and, along with it, my expanded character. I became a clown that presented magic, like it would have been presented in the ritual of a secret brotherhood of sacred showmen. The symbolic gesture explained and showed myself and the audience how I felt about the magic I presented, and what relationship I had to what made the magic happen. It became the hook I could hang everything else on, my cogito ergo sum, or my version of Archimedes' firm spot on which to stand to move the world. So this, to those who have done clowning workshops or whatever, this might be recognizable as you're out there and you're just struggling and everything is just chaotic, and all of a sudden you find out one little thing, one little firm place to stand, and then from there you can develop a whole character, and it can be as easy. Sometimes it's a name, sometimes it's an action, sometimes it's something else. And I unthinkingly performed this gesture in my dad's magic workshop. And as soon as I did, everything clicked together in my head. Years of practice, thinking, gathering notes, and small, relatively unremarkable presentations came together. My character's modus operandi, my particular way of doing my way to truthfully perform magic. That is not to say that what I did was true, like how evolution is true, or that the sum of triangles, the angles add up to 180 degrees. What I mean is that I could now express my character's attitude and truth, which is more of an ecstatic truth than an accountant's truth. These are terms used by Werner Herzog, which we will revisit in the chapter on Showman and the truth sometime in the future. But the gesture connected my inner truth with the outer truth of the expression, or more simply put, my heart was suddenly in what I did. This is a kind of clown truth. Certain things are true when presented in a university lecture. Others are experienced as truth when presented by a clown. And the triangle eye became the fulcrum upon which my clown truth pivoted. In hindsight, I do remember seeing this particular gesture in some weird book that I'd bought off Amazon because it had the word carnival in the title. Carnival and death and whatever. But I can't remember now. But it ended up being some demented story of a man kidnapped by some crazy cult or secret society or something, and nothing much about carnivals. But anyway, I can't for the life of me remember what the name of this book was, so I'm not claiming this spontaneous use of hand gesture was a novel invention of my own, just that the novel use of it in that moment was a genuine act of creative inspiration. That book is now in a box in the basement of my house in Australia. So, the triangle eye. The symbol felt relevant to me as the character of me as magician, and also as a kind of mystical clown. The multifaceted, multi-layered meanings it expressed intrigued me, since it's a well-known and recognizable occult symbol. Possibly the most reproduced esoteric symbol in the world, since it is also printed on every American $1 bill. I like this dichotomy of well-known and esoteric, occult and transparent, occult meaning hidden or obscure. This disparity produced a field of tension, a play space of interest, an area of interest, a meeting point where I met my expanded performer self, and in this same space I was ready to meet my audience. The juxtaposition of the mystical with the ridiculous, two poles of opposite, holy and foolish, black and white, finite and infinite, created fertile playing fields for creation, for connection, playful interaction, and of meaning in any act, much like the Showman audience or the Muspelheim, Nibelheim, hot, cold, giant cow stuff that we talked about in the geometry lecture last time. So, what does it mean? When I began searching what the triangle eye means, I found so many different ways this symbol has been understood throughout the ages, and more importantly, it connected up and tied together disparate bits and thoughts and insights that I'd had about performing and showmanship. And the triangle eye became a triangular seed, and so much was packed into it, like an oak tree inside an acorn. Studying upon the meanings of others that others had attributed to the symbol, I got lost in this oak's magnificent sprawling crown. And the origin of the symbol in the world at large is, as many occult things, it's difficult to pinpoint, but there seems to be some agreement that its earliest uses was in Christian iconography. I am prepared to be corrected on this, but there is, some agreement. That's not too strong a statement, but in Renaissance Europe it was used in all kinds of Christian art, in frescoes, paintings and church ceilings, often surrounded by clouds or sunbursts, representing the eye of God watching over humanity, and it also pointed towards the Trinity of Father, Son and Holy Ghost, the three coming together into one. The Trinity is something which resonates with our explorations. So, put a pin in that for now. And it was used as early as 1797 in the iconography of Freemasonry, where it represented the great architect of the universe, which is their version of the concept of God or the infinite wisdom of the universe. So, of course, the use of an eye as a symbol goes way back into the depths of mythological time. So, precursors for the triangle eye are many, one prominent being the Egyptian Eye of Horus, and also the concept of a third eye, which apparently allows one to see beyond the ordinary. All of this was well and good, but one could endlessly ask and seek through these rabbit holes of what it has meant to other people or other organizations. What does it mean? It seems like such a simple question, but it turned out that all the possibilities combined into an explosion of meaning which left me lost in a forest of meaning so varied and complex that it rendered it kind of meaningless. That's okay, I guess, if it's just in a show. You just do it and it doesn't matter, but I am not put together in a way that accepts that. When I am doing something like that, I also want to know what it actually symbolizes for me. I do it, and sometimes I might never actually say it, but the way that I have thought about it and I contain this knowledge within me, and I believe in a subtle, unconscious way, I am still showing that to the audience, and that increases their chance that they will experience me as authentic, even when I'm as ridiculous as I am when I'm doing some of these shows. And the symbol, even if it was complex and meaningless, the symbol worked. It seemed to make such sense to me. I felt like I understood it, but when I tried to express it to myself or others, I couldn't. And this is, of course, back to Augustine of what is life, and you go, I know, but then when I'm trying to explain it, then I don't know it anymore. The solution came when I managed to properly formulate the question. A symbol, or any work of art for that matter, will only answer the questions you ask it. What does it mean to me, was that question. What does it mean and symbolize to the part of me which is actually showing it? What does it mean to the showman? And this became the key. What does the triangle mean to the showman? It seems so simple and obvious in hindsight. It often does. Maybe I'm just really slow, but I already had the whole process philosophy worked out, and I had these ideas of showman and the crowd and all this and that we've spoken about. And all of a sudden, this symbol began mapping onto this system of thought, and I was much delighted. Finally, I saw it. And this became, picturing the 4 elements of showmanship. And the 3 points of the triangle perfectly expressed showman, audience, and show, and the 3 elements which I needed in the process of showmanship. But what was so illuminating was that the eye became the most elegant solution to the 4th constituent, the 4th pillar, namely attention. The all-seeing eye that looks through the triangle, or looks at the triangle. It was such a perfect way to represent the attention, which made the whole process possible. What brings together the 3 aspects to form a synergy, where the whole is greater than the sum of their parts, is the fact that we can have the contract of shared attention, and that goes into a joint attention as we create the show. And the symbol for the attention as an eye seems perfectly apt, since the process of showmanship is fundamentally about seeing and showing. Showmanship is about seeing and being seen. It's about seeing each other face to face, and a showman is someone who faces the other way. And the purpose of showing is to be seen. This means that the eye is implicit in the name we give the craft, showmanship. The eye carries in it both the audience watching the show and the showman showing them, and the shared or connecting aspects of the attentive process. Perhaps even the eye as the symbol for attention can be seen in the ship, the vehicle which transports the showman and audience off the line, connecting them and into the new area of interest, which is the show. The eye is symbolized in ship sailing the two into the dynamic reality of shows. It is by the eye of attention that the triangle of showmanship becomes possible. The triangle eye joins the three into a whole. The three essentials are such that their relation to each other are part of their definition. It is not one or the other, but one and the others. The triangle and I are four, but also one. The constituents form an ecosystem, a process where all parts are of equal value, and together their collected value is greater than the sum of their parts. The art form of entertainment, the process of showmanship, is the interplay between these. If one is neglected or one favored, the whole will eventually suffer. In an ecosystem, it's all about balance. In practical terms, an artist's focus shifts depending on what aspects interests him at any or her at any given moment, or whatever stage they're at along the way. It can vary in each different act or show, or even in each performance of an act or a show. But at the end of the day, if there is balance between the emphasis and thought that goes into material structure and character, as well as in the relationship between audience, showman, and show, we are dealing with a powerful kind of performance, which I call illuminated showmanship. And I will go into a whole lot more detail and consider many further aspects for each of the four elements of showmanship. But before doing that, I would like to take a step back. I'd like to go back to the beginning of the process of becoming a showman, to a time before one identified as a showman or artist or performer. How does one become a showman, and how does one find one's way in life? And that will be the subject of the next exciting chapter of The Way of the Showman. And there you have it. This is the story of how I actually first landed on the triangle, and how I then realized what a good symbol it could be for understanding or picturing what showmanship is. And I always find that these symbols, as we spoke about in the end of the last episode, that I find this dynamic kind of relationship that I have with them as a perfect way to expand my. It becomes like a mnemonic. So I see that picture and I keep connecting it to it, and having that little symbol in my head of these four, that really helps me apply it in the world. It's just a way to think about it that makes sense to me, certainly. And it's interesting as well as how these things, when you first start think of one thing, it's like the thoughts get a certain kind of gravity themselves. The more you think about it, the more things start to connect, and you start to see connections to the rest of the world. And that, in many ways, is what this very whole enterprise, this whole project of The Way of the Shaman, in my mind, is just to go, how does what I do connect to the rest of the world? And what makes it meaningful to me and the world and everything, and how can I, because I don't want to base my life, just like I don't want to just do a symbol in the show without having thought about what it means. I don't like to perform and do what I do without having thoroughly thought it through. That is just the nature of who I am. And I can go on about it at length, and I will in the next episodes of The Way of the Showman. And that's all I had to say of that stuff. And I'd just like to say, if you like what I do, please support me. Drop me a coffee at buymeacoffee.com/Captain Frodo. And but more importantly, tell your friends. If you know someone, strike up a conversation, or just send them a link. Post it on your Instagram or your Facebook, TikTok wall, and make a dance about it. That, I think I said that last time too, but that still would be amazing. Anyway, that's all I have to say. So all that's left to be said is take care of yourself and those you love, and I hope to see you along the way.